Okay. All right. Hi, everyone. I am Emily Bennington with the Circle of Atonement, and I am happy to be joined, as always, by Robert Perry. We are calling our discussion today The Picture of a New You, and it comes from a section in the Complete and Annotated Edition of A Course in Miracles called The Picture of the Crucifixion, or Picture of Crucifixion. Robert and I were joking that if we called it Picture of Crucifixion, no one would show up because it sounds like a downer message. But when we get into it, as you'll see, this is actually a very hopeful message and one that we know can help us all, especially in times like these. You can find the Picture of Crucifixion section in the Complete and Annotated Edition of A Course in Miracles, beginning on at the beginning of chapter 27. And the basic idea here is that our suffering in life is a case where we hurt ourselves. And we hurt ourselves so that we can send a message of blame to someone else. And just in the interest of full disclosure, I want to say here at the beginning that we do recognize that this is a difficult teaching. On one hand, it is both transcendent and truly liberating, and on the other, it feels insensitive and out of touch not to acknowledge that we do experience tremendous pain and suffering in this world. So our plan is to go through a series of points today. We have 8. And so, hello, Robert. How are you?
Hi. Good, good.
Good. And so you're going to get us started with our first point, huh?
Yes. So we're going to try through these points to kind of build an overall argument that makes this way out idea that we hurt ourselves or we choose suffering so that we can send a message of blame to someone else to make that idea seem plausible and reasonable. The first point is that we don't have to experience their behavior as hurtful. Our interpretation, which is our choice to internalize their message, is what directly hurts us. So it's not their behavior that directly hurts us, it's our interpretation of it.
Right. So we all know that interpretation is incredibly powerful. I mean, different people have completely different emotional reactions to receiving the exact same treatment. And I'm thinking specifically of an example from my own life where two people gave me the exact same feedback. And with one of them, I didn't let it in. It just kind of bounced right off. But with the other one, it went all the way in and it deeply hurt me. And same feedback, different people. And the only difference was my response to it.
Hmm. Yeah, there's life abounds with examples of just how powerful our interpretation is. There's that famous Shakespeare line, how does it go? There is
There's nothing good or bad, but thinking makes it so.
exactly, yeah. So we know that interpretation is a powerful factor. The course just takes it a step further and basically asks, what if interpretation is all powerful, not a factor, but the factor? So that would mean that we could interpret even very attacking behavior as being powerless.
Yeah. And this is where it starts to get pretty thorny because by attacking, when the course says attacking, it's referring to the full gamut from the slightest sideways glance all the way up to an actual physical attack. And this is where we have to be really careful because we're not asking anyone to subject themselves to physical abuse or emotional abuse. Of course, if you're in a situation like that, you obviously need to remove yourself from it. But what the course is saying here is that we have control over how we interpret everything, including all forms of attack. And it's also focusing on the way that we're attacking as well. So it's asking us to look at both things. We're when we're attacked, we can control how we let that message in, and we attack. And so we need to take a closer look at why we do that.
And of course, what we're going to find is that those two things fuse together. When we let it in, that is an attack. And we'll talk more about that. But I think the thing to add here, as we will be dealing throughout with the difficulties that are brought up by this teaching, the thing to add is this is something we apply to our own experience. It's not something we go around trying to foist onto other people. Oh, you felt abused when you were a child? Well, guess what?
You let
Right?
that message in.
Yeah.
Right. That's what I was saying about it being thorny, because that's not the message that you want to send. And yet, when you really understand how we internalize messages, there is some kind of a liberation to it. And so it's a really, really tight needle to thread.
Yeah. And I've seen people and I've worked with people who have felt like truly significant liberation from this idea, and I helped them with that, but they were asking for that help. This is not something you just go, foist onto people, especially when they're upset at you. Right? That's not the time to say, well, you think I attacked, but it's only you who chose to interpret it, and you don't want to do that.
Right. That would be the height of insensitivity. And I mean, that actually feels abusive to me. That if someone feels attacked by your behavior and then you just hit them again with, it's just how you're internalizing it. So yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So
Okay.
what is the next point?
Okay. So the next point is we have an actual wish to be unfairly treated.
Yeah, so this seems really strange, and I'm sure that there's a lot of people who are watching or listening and wondering, why on earth would we have a wish to be unfairly treated?
It does seem bizarre. On the other hand, I think that we can feel that in ourselves. Anyway, the section opens with a line that speaks directly to it. What it says is this: the wish to be unfairly treated is a compromised attempt that would combine attack and innocence. So the wish to be unfairly treated combines attack and innocence. The idea is that if we're unfairly treated, we get to attack while being innocent. It's kind of the best of both worlds.
Hmm. So if we are unfairly treated, we get to attack while feeling innocent. So what's going on here is that there's something in us, there's the ego in us that wants to attack. The ego's nature is attack, but we also still need to look like the good guy. And so if we can attack the other person and still see ourselves as innocent, then that idea is obviously attractive to us.
Yeah. And even though it sounds a bit twisted, I do, like I said a minute ago, I think there's something we can feel in us along those lines. It's like there's a righteousness when you've been attacked and you've been victimized in your eyes, where you get to be quite aggressive and you get to be totally innocent. And something in us loves that.
Right. But we have to see ourselves as unfairly treated, because we need that in order to attack. Because if we don't see ourselves as unfairly treated, then we don't get to attack.
Right. So that's the motivation to see yourself unfairly treated.
Okay, but what if we are unfairly treated? And I'm thinking about instances in life. I mean, it's the gamut, right? Somebody's just rude to us, all the way up to an actual physical attack, like what we saw in the U.S. Capitol last week. So, where does this idea of just wanting to see ourselves as unfairly treated fit when we have actually been unfairly treated here?
Well, I think unfairly treated is an interpretation. It goes beyond the actual physical actions carried out. Like you can describe all the physical actions that happened in a given interaction, um, without adding on that was unfair treatment, right? So, what the course is not disputing that attack happens. It sees the world as full of attack, as governed by attack, both on the natural level and the human level. So the Course is looking with very sober eyes at the world. I don't think it would be surprised by anything that happens on the face of this earth. So it's not denying that attacks happen. It's just saying you don't have to take that extra step of saying, I was unfairly treated in your mind. And if you don't do that, you actually don't have to experience the hurt.
Yeah, I can see that, where we don't have to experience the hurt. There's something in us that chooses to. And I think it is helpful to keep in mind that the Course absolutely understands that this is a world of attack. So it's not denying that, and it's not asking us to deny that either. And
Right.
so if you can look at this world, and it sounds like just really dark, doesn't it? But if you can look at this world and say, this is a place of attack, and how am I going to respond to that attack, then there is real liberation in that as well. And you
Yeah.
can feel me kind of struggling with this, because on one hand, as I was saying in the intro, it's both sides. Like, I genuinely do see the liberation in this. We don't have to let in the attacks, and we should be looking at the ways in which we're doing that in order to attack other people. And at the same time, I mean, you can just go through the list of ways in which people really are hurt. I mean, I'm honestly, my heart goes out to everyone at the Capitol who was hurt. And so I feel like, again, this is a really, really tough thing to be on both sides.
You know, while you're talking, what I'm thinking is this can sound really pie in the sky. We don't have to feel hurt, whatever they did. But I think to help the message sound as wise and sort of sober, um, as it needs to sound, we need to add that other people aren't being excused, like, and excused in ways that we often hear, like, you know, we often hear that everyone's always doing their best, um, and that their intentions were good. Well, the Course wouldn't agree with that. It says that the aim of every attack is murder, even if it's not physical murder. There's a murderous impulse in there, and it says the intent behind every attack is cruelty. So it's not letting people off the hook. It's just saying that before that attack can actually hurt us emotionally, yes, it can hurt us physically if that's the nature of the attack, but before it can hurt us emotionally, we have to interpret it in a certain way and give it a certain amount of power. And we have control over that ultimately.
Yeah, and there is a lot of power in that if you take back that control, right? And that's the liberating part of this idea.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we should probably move on to the next
Yeah, we
point,
probably
shouldn't
should.
we? So what is our next point?
Okay, the next point is that once we perceive ourselves as unfairly treated, we consent to suffer by internalizing the message in their behavior. The message is either implicit or explicit in their attacking behavior.
Right. So as we've been saying, the point here is that we don't actually have to do that. And this feels like such a small example, but I think this is true for all of us. It reminds me of what I was saying earlier about the feedback that I got that was the same from two different people. One I internalized deeply, and the other I just brushed off. And we all have some instance of that in our life where we can just, depending on our relationship with the person, dismiss something that someone says and not let it in, or we can absolutely deeply let it in. And again, as we're saying, the point here is that we don't have to do that.
Right, right. And I think letting it in is good language because there is something in their behavior. I think what we find so hurtful is they're saying something about us, something negative. And when generally what we do to some degree is we decide, okay, I'm going to internalize that. Even though part of our mind may violently reject it, we may say, They're absolutely wrong. It's an outrage. I don't agree at all. They have me all wrong. Another part of our mind takes it in, believes in it, and now we hold that negative picture of ourselves, even if it's in a part of our mind that is being denied by another part.
Right. And then once we internalize that negative picture of ourself, we carry it forward into all of our interactions. This is why when someone says something that hurts us, when we have let it in, we can't help but keep reminding them of what they said. There is something in us that wants to punish them because we don't feel like we deserve what they said, and at the same time there's something in us that has just made what they said part of our picture of ourselves, and it's clouding our view of ourselves.
Yeah, and of course where we're heading, which is that inherent in all this is it's all setting us up to be able to send this message of blame to them, where we keep reminding them of what they did and the hurt that it caused. But we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves.
Right. So, I mean, as we're saying, like, you have to let that message in order to, you have to let it in order to say to them, you've treated me unfairly.
Right.
And
Right.
if you were just kind of brushing it off, then you wouldn't have any ground to say that to them.
Right. So
Right.
there's a
Okay.
motivation. Okay. So the next point is that, and this is kind of circling back to the beginning to some degree, but this is the real cause of all of our hurts. We consider the cause of our hurts to be what they did, right? But the real cause is that thing in us that decides to internalize the negative picture of us implicit in their behavior.
Right. And this is what we've been saying all along. We don't actually have to feel that hurt. It's something that we're choosing to do. And again, I mean, that's one thing that makes this teaching so difficult. um I guess I'm not talking so much about extreme examples of physical or emotional abuse, but just in the more everyday examples of the way in which we let in what other people have said to us and things that we have perceived as attack. This is a hard thing to look at because we have to admit to ourselves that this is what we're doing, and
Yeah.
that's difficult.
And it's going to get worse as we go through the points.
Yeah. So what's our next point?
Yeah. So we are, like we both just said, kind of circling back to the beginning, but the new thing is it explains a motive. It explains why we would choose to feel hurt when we don't have to. It basically we do that so that we can say we've been unfairly treated, and then so that the rest that we'll look at can follow. So according to this section, we are choosing to suffer pain. There's a really powerful line in the third paragraph that says, whenever you consent to suffer pain, to be deprived, unfairly treated, or in need of anything, you but accuse your brother of attack upon God's Son.
Yeah, when we were talking about this earlier, it was thinking in need of anything. Whenever you consent to suffer pain, or whenever you're in need of anything, you accuse your brother of an attack upon God's Son. I mean, that's a pretty extraordinary statement.
Yeah, it's incredibly inclusive. We would naturally think, yeah, there are instances of this. But what the section is saying is everything pretty much that you're experiencing is an instance of this. Between that passage and then another passage earlier in the text about the same idea, there's quite a number of forms of suffering that are laid at the feet of this dynamic. So here's the list: pain, deprivation, unfair treatment, need of any kind, as we said, sickness, which this section talks about at length, anxiety, despair, and guilt. All of those are the result of taking in the attack so that you can claim to be unfairly treated and so that the other things we'll talk about can follow.
So whenever we're in a state that is less than total joy, then we have consented to suffer at the hands of someone else.
Yeah, which I think to some degree we've got to say I can see this at work in certain instances, perhaps, and then I can, you know, grant on faith or open my mind to the possibility that it's all inclusive, because it doesn't seem all inclusive.
Yeah, and it's also safe to say that all of us experience less than total joy. And so those who claim to be in total joy, um, which is a position that some pose as being enlightened, right? Like I'm in total joy at all times, so therefore I'm enlightened. That always strikes me as just plain old denial.
Yeah, yeah, that's a whole topic unto itself. Yeah, it's true. I mean, I think from the course's standpoint, we are all depressed to varying degrees in this world. That's one thing I got from doing a word study of depression in the course. If you look at, there's not that many, maybe like 40 references to it. But if you look at the references, he's acting like this applies to all of us. All of us, compared to our natural state of joy in heaven, are depressed here. And I think it's a good starting point just to admit that that's true to whatever degree it is.
I feel like I want to park there for a minute, but at the
This
same,
kind of, yeah, this,
yeah,
uh,
because there has to be some hope that we could graduate to higher and higher states of joy.
sure.
That's what we're doing here, right? Where if we, as long as we're clearing the blocks to love, then to the extent that we're feeling more love, we will feel more joy in our lives. So I don't, I mean, I
Yeah, we do
know,
graduate to higher forms. It's just that until we're completely out of separated existence, out of time and space, we're not in touch with our natural state of oceanic joy.
okay, so what
But
is
yeah,
our next point?
so the next point is kind of what it's all been leading up to. The reason why we're wanting to take in that negative picture of us is so that we can then show them a picture of ourselves as hurt to send a message of guilt. So it's kind of like they are doing something to us that doesn't actually hurt us. It's almost like they've got a weapon in their hand and they're swinging it in our direction. We then take the weapon out of their hand and hit ourselves with it so that we can show them a picture of ourselves as injured and send them a message of blame or guilt. And we can see that in the following passage, which is a really kind of evocative, powerful passage. It says, "You hold a picture of your crucifixion before his eyes, that he may see his sins are writ in heaven in your blood and death, and go before him, closing off the gate and damning him to hell." So it's not just that you privately feel hurt. You privately feel hurt so that you can hold this picture of crucifixion before the other person's eyes and send him a message about himself. It's like this picture is proof that you are a sinner.
Right. That is such a dark image. And it's the same thing that's captured in that line. Death seems an easy price to pay. If you can say, "Behold me, brother, at your hand I die." You can say, "Look at me and look at because of my suffering, look at what a monster you are."
Yeah, and it's a dark passage. I mean, both the one I read and the one you did. But I think we have to admit that it captures a side of human nature. And what I always think of when we come upon, whenever I teach this section or we talk about it in a class, is I was writing commentary on this section somewhere around, I think, like 2006. And uh, right as I was writing about these passages, I I ended up reading something online, and it was a fascinating and shocking story about a very well-known spiritual teacher in the US. And when his followers, when he felt that they weren't sufficiently loyal or they didn't do what he told them to do, which he felt was for their own good, um, he would banish them for a time to this kind of like basement level of the complex, uh, where they would have to sit and contemplate these artistic renderings done by the in-house artist, and the artwork was of them depicted as demons who were attacking and disemboweling the teacher, the master. So they were shown these pictures essentially of his crucifixion with them as the perpetrators, as their lesson, their penance. I don't know what it was, but it was such an exact reproduction of what's said in this section that it was almost spooky.
Yeah, well, that is obviously a very extreme story. And when you shared that with me this morning, I was like, yeah, but we're kind of sending the same message when we're just kind of moping around the house, right? Like
Yeah,
it's the same thing. It's I'm hurt because of what you did. And so much of our lives is this idea of we have to be hurt to show other people what they've done to us. And we do that, of course, because we want them to change their behavior. Um, we don't want them to do the thing that has hurt us. And so part of our condition of staying in the relationship in whatever form it takes is we're going to have to demonstrate how hurt we are so that they know again what a monster they are, and
they're motivated to change.
they're motivated to change their behavior, and that
Yeah.
becomes part of our manipulation to control another person. See, you did this thing to me, you better not do it again because look how much I'm suffering.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a powerful motivation here. I'll bet the course would say that underneath that there's something in us that just likes to attack, but we don't need to, dwell on that. What I'm thinking about is when you read this section and think about it, you start thinking about all of the ways in which we constantly show people how much they hurt us. It's not just like, we get hurt and they happen to see it. We want them to see it.
We're
This
driven to show them.
we have to show them, and it's just a major part of life as we know it. And while we're talking, I'm thinking about this story that um, I've told my kids because I find it like to be an embarrassing story, but it's a classic story of this. I was like 4. I would spend like half the day, or at least a lot of the day, drawing. I drew dinosaurs and things, and I wanted to use a certain pen. I liked drawing with pens, not pencils. Um, and I asked my mom if I could use this pen, and she was like, "No, you can't use it." And I don't know how long. It felt like 2 hours. I'm sure it was more like 10 minutes, but I consciously spent the next stretch of time visibly like sad and crestfallen until she finally said, "Is something wrong?" And I said, "You hurt my feelings."
Mhm.
And it was because I couldn't. And she said, "Well, that's your dad's special pen. You can use any other pen in the house." And there were probably like, 50 of them. Um, but I just remember like really wanting to be noticed as being hurt.
Yeah, I have a similar experience when I was a kid. I'll just share this very briefly.
Unlike mine.
I was, yeah, it's the same kind of thing. I remember, um, so much of our childhood we forget, but I distinctly remember this time where my dad didn't do something that I wanted him to do. And I sat in the bathtub and I just wailed. And I wanted him to know, but through my crying, that he had hurt me. And this is something I did when I was like, I mean, I was under the age of 10. And and I remember I was crying for real. And then I was thinking in my head, I need to keep crying. So the crying was fake and he knew it was fake. So he never came in. And then I was like hurt because he never came in. And
Right.
as a parent, I've seen my own children pull this kind of thing. And I've responded in the same way that my dad responded. It's like, I know you're just faking, so I'm not gonna really be motivated to go and help. Um, of course, I'm motivated to go and help. We're all motivated to help our children, but when you can, it's different when you can see that they're just faking it to pull something out of you.
Yeah.
And so one thing I was thinking as you were sharing your story, and as I was thinking about that experience with my dad, as children, we have to cry so that people can see how hurt we are.
Hmm.
But one thing that I've noticed in myself as an adult is I don't cry to prove how much someone else has hurt me. I withdraw. And so it what as a child, this behavior comes out as tears and crying, but as an adult, it's withdrawal and silence. And so if I can show someone that I'm suffering through my silence, it's the same exact thing.
Yeah. Although, I mean, we shouldn't underestimate the volume of adult crying. But still, I think as we grow up, we have to get a bit more sophisticated with how we show it, and a bit more subtle,
Mm-hmm.
or else it's just antisocial.
And you were saying that this goes up to the point of making ourselves sick. And the course says that this goes up
Right.
to making ourselves sick.
And this section does have a quite a bit of focus on the connection between this dynamic and physical illness. And what I always think about in this respect is when I first got the course, I'd had it for maybe a year. Um, and I was sharing with a friend who was a Christian. And for some reason, I opened to this section, and she was, or maybe she did, and she was reading this part, and she got that it was saying that we make ourselves sick in order to send a message, behold me, brother, at your hand I die. And I'll never forget what she said when she finished reading this part. She said, I don't understand what that means, but I know it's what my mom did. And her mother had just a few years earlier died of cancer. And she felt through the experience that her mother was sending that message to the family. Let me just read the passage here. But it was that story stuck in my mind as we can perhaps do this on the level of very serious illnesses. So here's the passage or just one sentence from our section. A sick and suffering you, but represents your brother's guilt. The witness which you send, lest he forget the injuries he gave, from which you swear he never will escape.
Hmm. Well, I think I've shared this in fact, I know I've shared this in our course companions classes, but whenever you talk about that experience with your friend saying, I don't know what it means, but I know that's what my mom did, I can tell you definitively that's what my mom did. Because she was sick with cancer, breast cancer, and then her cancer went into remission, and we did not have a great relationship. It was difficult. And so when her cancer came back, she she was kind of mad that I didn't go to see her quicker. I couldn't get there faster. I was there within a couple of days, but I couldn't get there immediately. And the first thing she said when I walked through the room was, I told you I was sick. And when I was reading these teachings, it was like, yeah, that's what my mom did too. It's like
What did she mean by that?
what she meant was, I told you I was sick. You didn't take it seriously enough to get here immediately, and therefore I'm you need to feel guilty about the way in which you didn't take me seriously
Mm-hmm.
enough. And
Yeah.
there was like something in her that was like, it was like a it was like a gotcha. It's like, I told you I was sick, and now you need to take care of me.
You know, what's coming up as we're talking about all this is the parent child aspect of this, I think, is particularly thick and heavy, right? Because there was that whole discourse, which is in the CE, it's the essential goal of therapy in chapter 3, I think it's section 8. And that is a discourse that was given through Helen to Bill about his relationship with his parents and how he had nursed this lifelong resentment that they did not value him enough and believe in him. Um, and so Jesus was basically in that discourse applying the exact same dynamics that we're looking at here. But, in that case, Bill was the child. In other cases, it's the parent. But it seems like the parent-child relationships are particularly fraught with this dynamic of, look what you did to me.
Right. Right. And I really felt that strongly, that it was a situation where I was supposed to feel guilty and be more loving to her in response, and that her sickness was a way to pull that from me and everyone else around.
Hmm.
And I, these things are so dark. I mean, they really are.
They are.
But at the same time, I feel like I'm not alone in that experience. I mean, you were just saying your friend said the same thing when she read
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
course.
Yeah. She was really feeling that her mother had actually in some way made herself contract the cancer to send the message, which is what the course is saying.
Wow. Another place where we could park. I feel like we should and will do another live or podcast on sickness, but
Yeah.
probably
Right.
shouldn't go too deep into it
Yeah.
here. So, do you want to move on to the next point? I know we're kind of running out of time.
Yeah. The next point is we think that by proving their guilt, we'll be free. And there's a sentence from the section that says this: the unjust vengeance that you suffer now belongs to him. And when it rests on him, are you set free? So if you can get across that he did this to you and he deserves vengeance, then you're free. And that's how it feels. Oddly, right?
Yeah, there's such a pull in us to want to feel innocent, to want to be the good guy, and we want to attack at the same time, as you've been saying.
We especially seem to want to feel innocent at the expense of someone else's guilt. That seems to be
And
like
that's
our
the attack.
favorite. Right, which is an attack. To point the finger of blame at them is an attack. And at the same time is how we gain innocence. So we want, like, well, the first sentence said it, we want to combine those two things,
Mm-hmm.
which is
Yeah.
not very innocent.
It isn't, is it? And this is a hard thing to, this takes a tremendous amount of self-reflection to say, you know what? I can see myself in that. I've seen myself do that. And yet, I
Mm.
think if we look close enough, we all have.
It's true. Yeah, it's true. I'm thinking like I hadn't thought about that story from when I was 4 in connection with this section, but you think, how did I know to like do this at such a young age? Nobody taught me.
Well, yeah, and that's why I shared this story about the crying in the bathtub. And like, no, it's interesting from a couple angles. Why why do I remember that so much? Like something in it like has really burned in my memory long about that long before I was a course student. And two, how did I know to do that? Like I
Hmm.
said, I was under 10 and I was trying to manipulate my dad with my tears. Where did I learn that?
Yeah.
Makes you wonder how much of this we just come in with because we have an ego.
Yeah. Do we get like, downloaded with certain software at birth?
Right. Like what are we carrying through?
Right.
Okay,
Yeah.
so
Okay.
that's off topic. So
So the
we're
next
gonna get
point,
next point. Yeah.
next point is, but we believe in the picture we show them. We're just thinking, hey, I'm going to make them guilty. But we make them guilty through embracing a picture of ourselves that is hurt, injured, damaged. And the section points out the irony of this. There's a couple of sentences. The picture of yourself you offer him, you show yourself and give it all your faith. Another one says, this sick and sorry picture you accept. if only it can serve to punish him.
Mm. Yeah, that sounds a lot like that quote I mentioned earlier. Death seems an easy price to pay if they can say, "Behold me, brother, at your hand I die." I mean, it's one of those things that it sounds really extreme, but we are so bent on blaming other people that even our own death seems like a price that we're willing to pay. And I know that sounds really kind of twisted, but I do think that that's what my
Mm.
mom was doing to some degree. I mean, you asked a second ago, like, what do you think? What message do you think she was trying to send? And is if you go deep enough into it, it's so dark. But it's like I think the message that she was trying to send is, see, you have finally killed me, and I hope you're happy now.
Hmm. It's making me wonder, and I don't know a lot about the psychology of suicide, but it's making me wonder how present that is in at least a certain number of suicides. There was somebody as I was growing up that was close to the family who attempted suicide, and looking back, I expect that that was absolutely central. The attempt to send the message of "Look what you've done to me."
Mm-hmm. You are such a monster that you've driven me to this.
Exactly. And
Mm-hmm.
I have nothing now left to live for because of you. I mean, I think that was absolutely just it was soaked with that.
Hmm. Gosh, I never made that connection with suicide, but it
No.
does feel like maybe there is something there. I had a dear friend of mine who committed suicide last year, and one thing, and this is again, it's just really really tough stuff, but in the months before his death, he really was calling out for help. And we were trying to help him. I could feel this like urgency around him, and nothing was going in. Like nothing was going in. And then eventually he just he took his own life. So
Mm.
yeah, it's
It's maybe more literal than we have been thinking.
uh-huh. Yeah, and so it just it's kind of coming back to this idea of what drives us to that. We all struggle with negative self-image, and that negative self-image is if, what this section is saying is that that negative self-image is driven in part by what we are letting in when it comes to other people's misperceptions of us. And so we do that to send a message of blame to them. And what an incredible idea. I mean, this isn't anything that we're going to hear anywhere else. I've never heard it taught anywhere else except the course.
Well, yeah. I mean, we have a culture that is very psychologically oriented, and that psychological orientation has so much to do with negative, getting out of negative self images. Where do we hear that we acquired those negative self images as an attempt to punish someone else, to blame someone else? Like, no one says that. What we hear is we acquired those self images because people didn't treat us right. But could there be a deeper story here?
Yeah, and again, it comes to holding both of those sides because on one hand, you want to appreciate the liberation that is here. I like you were saying earlier, I've also talked to people who are like, "Oh my God, I get it. I let this in order to punish them, and I don't have to do that." And then you have like people experience trauma, and so you don't want to completely negate the trauma that they've experienced in their life, and so we have to be careful with this.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I have these opposite reactions because, I my childhood wasn't particularly awful. It had its moments, but you get to know people who had unbelievable childhoods, and your heart can't help go out to them. And you never want to say to them, but do you realize, you took all that in as an act of will to punish your parents or whatever. You don't want to say that to them. And yet at the same time, I have seen people be really set free by applying this very message to their childhood and their parents. So you don't want, I think you just have to be mainly focused on applying it to yourself and not foisting it on anyone else.
Yeah, I think that's a really key point, to think about these teachings and apply them to yourself and not sort of throw them at other people. One thing that you and I've been talking about in terms of this idea and what we carry around from, you mentioned childhood, how much our childhoods are over, right? And so how much of that are we carrying around, not just to punish people? I can't punish my mother anymore, she's gone, but I still carry some things around. And I am starting to see, or I have seen through the help of these teachings, the ways in which it has impacted how I see myself. And that I do feel is relevant and up for all of us. We do that. We don't have to carry these negative self impressions around, and how much of them are driven by misperceptions other people have had of us that we've just let in.
Right. And it's understandable to let them in as a child. Jesus thinks we had a power of will even as children that we probably weren't in touch with. But especially now that we're adults, we have the power to look back and see it differently.
Right.
Okay. So,
So we have one last point.
yes, one last point. And this is what it is. We need to accept our healing so that we can send our brother the opposite message, not the message of blame and guilt.
Right. And the opposite message is our practice line for today. It's behold me, brother, at your hand I live. And the idea is that we can, just as we can send a message to someone that says, behold me, brother, at your hand I've died, look what you've done to me, we can also send the message to someone that says, you haven't done anything to me.
And at your hand I live even goes further, right? It's not just you didn't do anything to me, it's that there's something in you that gives me life regardless of your behavior, which is a really powerful, like at your hand I live is such the other side of the spectrum. It's a very powerful statement.
Well, say more about that.
Well, I mean, the opposite of at your hand I die is not just at your hand nothing happened to me. The opposite is all the way on the other end. At your hand I live. And to say that suggests there is some life-giving influence that's passing from them to us.
I'm really glad that you said that, because without that piece, without that understanding of the interconnectivity between us, if you said some form of behold me, brother, at your hand I live, it almost could take on like a smarting aspect, like, ha, I'm fine. And you didn't do anything to me. So there. And that's not the message that's intended to come through here, obviously. So
Right. What's that old thing of they bounce off me and stick to you?
yeah, I'm rubber and you're glue. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this could become a version of that if we stop with you didn't do anything to me. It's like if we go all the way to at your hand I live, that is ennobling. That says something about them, truly affirming.
Right. So it's at your hand I live, so you're not the monster that you may have thought you were, because somewhere in you you're feeling guilty about this exchange as well, right?
Right.
So we're
Right.
not just letting them off the hook and walking away, we're letting them off the hook for true healing in the understanding and recognition of our interconnectedness.
Right. And we're not just letting them off the hook and looking down on them, we're
Right.
lifting them up.
Right.
So imagine, I mean, for Americans, we are so caught up in the left versus right dynamic where, it's almost like it's like a cold civil war, you could say. in the US. And imagine one side saying to the other, "Behold me, brother, at your hand I live."
Yeah. And the temptation with me here is to want to kind of bucket these things into two separate categories and say, we're really just talking about everyday interactions, and we're not talking about this other spectrum of true physical and emotional abuse. I think I've even said something like that thus far. And yet, when you look at the example of Jesus, he was all the way on the spectrum of physical abuse. He's crucified, for God's sake. And in the act of his own crucifixion, he sent that message of, behold me, brother, at your hand I live, I can't die.
Well, I
um,
think in the resurrection, especially.
right, in the resurrection especially. So my point here is that Jesus was attacked in the most vicious and violent way, and yet was able to send a message of, behold me, brother, at your hand I live, I'm nothing can destroy truth. He taught love all the way up to the point of his own death. And we're not there yet. So,
Yeah, I think
so
we're
I know
not
that
there
sounds
yet.
like you can take, if you take something like that and just clip it in isolation, it sounds incredibly naive. And yet at the same time, there is something liberating about Jesus's message. That's, of course
Absolutely.
there is.
And it's hard not to think about his example when the section is called the Picture of Crucifixion. And then it builds up to this point where, you know, he's talking about the body receiving the power to represent an endless life forever unattacked. And then that's where it goes on to say, "And to your brother let its message be, behold me, brother, at your hand I live." The idea of a body representing endless life that sends a message to others, it's hard to not think of his resurrection there. I'm sure that must have been in mind. Anyway, I think the key to this is that we really, to send this message, "Behold me, brother, at your hand I live," we do have to accept our own healing, at least on an emotional level, or else the whole thing doesn't really work.
Right. So it doesn't mean though that we're acting like we're not hurt, even though we are.
I think that's how it's very tempting to take this. And that's how I've been tempted to take it in the past. You know, I'm in a relationship and I'm feeling hurt. And I used to love practicing this line from the text that says, "You cannot be hurt and do not want to show your brother anything except your wholeness." So that's the very similar, you know, you don't want to show him anything except your wholeness. And I'd be thinking, okay, so my job is to portray or project this wholeness, even though I feel really hurt. And that's not it. It's not that we're just trying to fake it.
Right. Trying to fake it just in order to be nice or to patch things together. That's not it.
That's not it. Because, you know, I mean, the course talks about that early on, that we think that, okay, we can keep the same judgmental thoughts towards people, but just say the right words and we can be a healing influence for them. Well, you know, that doesn't, your words at that point don't have a lot of power because you don't really mean them. So yeah, our job here is not to feel hurt or regard ourselves as hurt and then just put on this appearance of being whole and intact.
I can imagine that that would be the temptation in
Absolutely.
this, as you're saying, that you want to, you believe in this because the idea is beautiful, and so you want to send a message of your wholeness, and yet you're not really feeling it.
Yeah.
And so yeah, that, I'm glad that you mentioned that too. But at the same time, you don't want to lose sight of just how beautiful the whole teaching is, right? Like in all these like little nuances. I mean, you can kind of pick things apart different ways, but the big picture here is it's a stunning reversal of what it is that we tend to do. We tend to let in misperceptions, hurt ourselves in order to attack other people, and we don't have to do that. We can completely step outside of our own ego and live differently, and not just like I'm faking this because I want to be spiritual, but like truly live differently because you're not letting in all of this attack, and you're not attacking as a result because you're not feeling hurt. And the big picture is really gorgeous.
It is, because to be able to say to someone and really mean to someone who in any normal perception really attacked you, to say, in an appropriate way, with your demeanor, with your face, with your actions, behold me, at your hand I live. It's such a reversal. It's a complete step outside the ego, and we shouldn't lose sight. I mean, we're trying to, deal with, don't do it this fake way, don't misunderstand this, et cetera, et cetera. And with all those caveats, we don't want to lose sight that there is a really beautiful teaching here that can really set people free. And I think we practice it, we apply it to ourselves, we apply it in the little things, and then one day maybe we can apply it in really big things.
Yeah, I know. It does. And I've been saying this all along, but it just feels like you have this extraordinary wisdom that is only of God. Again, where do you learn these kinds of teachings? They are gorgeous, but as you're walking along the path of it, you have to watch out for these landmines of but what about, but what about, but what about, but what about?
Yeah.
And you can't lose sight of the big picture here, which is, well, actually, you sum up the big picture, because
Well,
we're
yeah,
running out of time here,
I
so I'm
know
gonna let you do that.
there's something I want to work in before we're out of time, and which has been the big takeaway for me among many in this material, and that is that we normally assume that in the act of being hurt there is an innocence. Like when you're hurt, it happens to you, so you seem to be entirely innocent in the process. So hurt feels like innocence. But if you yourself chose to be hurt, not entirely consciously, but you still chose it in order to blame someone else, that turns what looked like total innocence in being hurt into basically a malicious act. And the words that Jesus used in talking about Bill with his parents were viciousness, spite, and punitive. So when we realize that being hurt is not so innocent, it's actually vicious, underneath the surface, there's a viciousness there. What happens is it lets the air out of being hurt. It lets the air out of taking it in. When we see, oh, taking it in, it's not so innocent. It's actually an aggressive act. It deprives us of the motivation to take in that negative message. And then that delivers us from the hurt and from the whole cycle.
This is so good. It's just, I feel like we could do this live in this podcast for another 5 hours, because what you said about hurt feeling like innocence, who can't relate to that? That feels very, very true. Like, I'm innocent because I'm the one that was hurt.
Right.
But what if I didn't have to be hurt in the first place?
What if I stab myself to frame you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I know we're at the top of the hour and we are running out of time here, but that that idea is truly transformational. I mean, it really is. And at the same time, it's one of those things that, as we were saying, this is the kind of teaching that you apply to yourself. And you look at the ways in which you're feeling hurt and equating that with innocence, because it is, in fact, insensitive to say to someone else, you're only feeling hurt because you're trying to attack me, or it's insensitive to say to someone else, to serve up this teaching when someone's in complete emotional distress. But if we do apply it to ourselves, we can see all the ways, well, many ways in which we have indeed hurt ourselves in order to attack.
Yeah. And I think just one last little thing. I don't think this is a teaching whose time has come. I think its time has not yet come, because we're in a culture that's going through, I think, a very necessary phase of learning more and more all of what we've been doing to each other,
Mm.
as parents, as priests, as Boy Scout leaders, as God knows what, everything. And that's the phase we need to go through to learn and see what's been happening and the gravity of it and the consequences of it. And in the middle of that, this is probably not a teaching that people can take in, appropriately right now, at least masses of people. So maybe someday, but for the moment, let's benefit from it ourselves and look forward to a time when it can get a larger kind of distribution.
Yeah, that feels really true. Like if you think of us just on the spectrum of history, I mean, for so long it's been, what are you talking about being in pain? Suck it up, right? Like we weren't allowed to feel anything. And now it feels like the pendulum has swung all the way to where we're kind of coddling our trauma to a large degree. And how does that inform the ways in which we move forward? And does it stunt us to some degree where our focus is the trauma and not on the healing? And
yet it needs to come out.
it
It needs to come
absolutely
out.
needs to come out. And the course says that throughout, like you have to look at this in order to heal it, but you can look at it and get stuck in the phase of looking.
Yeah.
And we have to kind of move to the healing.
Right. And you can look and get stuck in the phase of pointing the finger too.
Right. So you can get stuck in not looking, you can get stuck in coddling, you can get stuck in blaming. And so we've got to
Yeah.
get up the
Yeah.
mountain to
Yeah.
the living.
Yeah. I'm feeling that 5 hours that you just mentioned, but I know we have to
Okay.
go ahead and end.
I know. Okay, so let's go ahead and close it here. Robert, thank you. As always, I've really enjoyed this and I hope others have too. It's really, really truly beautiful teaching.
Amazing
And,
material.
I'll see you next time.